The sound hit me first, a low rumble that seemed to shake my very bones before I even understood what was happening. Then the wall of white. I had exactly 2.7 seconds to comprehend that I was about to be buried alive before the avalanche consumed everything. They say your life flashes before your eyes when death approaches. Mine didn't. Instead, my mind fixated on the most ridiculous detail. I'd left half a chocolate protein bar in my jacket pocket, and my last coherent thought was disappointment that I'd never get to finish it. Then the world turned upside down. Day 1, the entombment. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Cold. So cold it burned. Darkness so absolute, I wondered if I'd gone blind. The crushing weight pressing on my chest, making each breath a deliberate act of will. The panic hit next. A primal, animal terror that set my heart racing. I thrashed instinctively, my limbs heavy and unresponsive within their frozen prison. This is how I die, I thought. Alone in the darkness, crushed beneath tons of snow, my body to be discovered months later when the spring thaw revealed what remained of me. Focus, Jacob. Focus or die. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale. 1, 2, 3. The avalanche safety training I'd taken 3 years ago flickered to life in my memory. First, create an air pocket. I brought my hands to my face, scooping away the packed snow until I had a small cavity around my mouth and nose. Next, determine which way is up. I gathered what little saliva I could muster and let it drip from my mouth. Gravity would pull it downward, except it didn't drip. It trickled onto my cheek. I was positioned almost horizontally, slightly tilted. The reality of my situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. I was buried approximately 6 to 8 feet beneath the snow's surface, lying on my side in a space barely larger than my body. My left arm was pinned awkwardly beneath me, already numb. My right leg erupted in pain whenever I shifted, suggesting either a break or severe sprain. The backpack I'd been wearing had somehow remained with me, pressed against my back. I tried to calculate my chances. Avalanche victims have approximately 15 minutes before carbon dioxide buildup becomes deadly. I had clearly been here longer, which meant there must be some air circulation, however minimal. Small mercies. The watch on my wrist, a sturdy expedition model my father had given me, showed 2:17 p.m. The avalanche had hit around noon. I'd been unconscious for over 2 hours. Outside, rescue teams would likely be mobilizing, but they'd be searching a vast debris field. The tracking beacon in my pack would help if it was still functioning. If someone was looking. If. So many ifs. I remembered reading once that the body loses heat 25 times faster in snow than in air. Already, the cold was seeping through my layers, the dampness from melted snow making it worse. Hypothermia would kill me before suffocation if I didn't act. With excruciating precision, I began to inventory my resources. The backpack was a promising start. Could I reach it? I twisted carefully, biting back a cry as pain lanced through my injured leg. My fingers, clumsy in thick gloves, fumbled with the zipper. Inside, a half-empty water bottle, already turning to slush, an emergency thermal blanket, a headlamp, a multi-tool, 3 energy bars, spare socks, a first aid kit, and my avalanche probe. No cell phone signal this deep, but the device might still be useful for its flashlight. The headlamp illuminated my snow tomb in harsh detail, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, with crystalline walls that reflected the light in disorienting patterns. My breath hung in clouds before my face. The temperature here, I estimated, was around -10 Celsius, though it felt colder against my damp clothes. Should I try to dig myself out? Conventional wisdom said to stay put and wait for rescue. But what if they were looking in the wrong place? What if my beacon wasn't transmitting? What if they assumed no survivors? The questions threatened to spiral into panic again. Take stock of injuries first. The leg, definitely injured. But I could wiggle my toes, which was promising. Ribs ached when I breathed deeply, possibly cracked, but not catastrophically. My left arm had pins and needles as circulation returned. Head throbbed, but no obvious concussion symptoms. I was damaged, but functional. Most pressing concern? Heat. I maneuvered the thermal blanket around my body, creating a reflective cocoon. Next, hydration. I needed to conserve water, but dehydration would accelerate hypothermia. I allowed myself 3 small sips from the bottle, then tucked it against my body to prevent further freezing. As the initial shock faded, other sensations emerged. Hunger, though muted by adrenaline. The uncomfortable pressure of a full bladder, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. And beneath it all, a whisper of something I refused to name. Despair. No, not yet. Not while I still had options. I thought of Sarah, my fiancée, probably still blissfully unaware that anything had happened. She'd be at work, designing her latest architectural project, occasionally glancing at her phone to see if I'd sent a photo from my quick solo hike in the Rockies. I'd promised to be back for dinner. She'd be annoyed at first when I didn't show, then increasingly worried. How long before she reported me missing? Before the authorities connected her report to the avalanche? The imagined look on her face, the transition from irritation to concern to horror, was suddenly more than I could bear. A sob escaped me, echoing strangely in my confined space. I bit it back quickly, crying wasted energy and water. Instead, I channeled my fear into action. I needed to do something, anything, to improve my odds. With methodical movements, I began packing snow behind my back, creating a more upright position to ease breathing and reduce pressure on my injured leg. The effort left me panting, each exhale creating ghostly plumes in the headlamp's beam. The snow above me creaked ominously. The sound froze me in place, breath held. Avalanche debris could shift unpredictably, my precarious air pocket collapsing without warning. I counted 30 seconds of silence before allowing myself to breathe again. As the hours crawled by, I established a routine. 5 minutes of movement to generate heat, followed by periods of stillness to conserve energy. Every hour, I permitted myself 1 sip of water and a tiny piece of energy bar. I clicked the headlamp on only when absolutely necessary. Night fell, though I could only tell by my watch. In my snow coffin, darkness was constant, absolute, hungry. I fought against sleep, knowing that surrendering to it might mean never waking. Instead, I recited poetry from memory, multiplied large numbers, anything to keep my mind active. At what my watch claimed was 11:43 p.m., I heard it, the distant sound of voices and dogs. Rescuers. I screamed until my throat was raw, pounded the snow walls until my hands ached. But the sounds grew fainter, then disappeared entirely. They had been looking for me, and they had missed me. The silence that followed pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that I might not be found in time, that this frozen cavity might become my final resting place. I thought of my parents, who had always worried about my risky hobbies. Of Sarah, who would be left with an empty apartment and unanswered questions. Of the future we'd planned together, dissolving like snowflakes on warm skin. No, I refused to give up. If rescue wouldn't find me, I would find a way out. With renewed determination, I took stock of my position. The avalanche probe in my pack could help me gauge the snow depth above me. Carefully, I assembled the collapsible metal rod and pushed it upward into the snow. It penetrated about 4 feet before hitting resistance, possibly a layer of ice or compacted snow. Not impossible to dig through, but challenging in my weakened state. I began to formulate a plan. I would rest through the night, conserving strength. At first light, though I wouldn't see it, I would begin digging upward. The probe would be my guide, creating a narrow chimney that I could eventually widen enough to escape. It was a desperate plan, full of flaws and potential disasters. But it was better than waiting passively for a rescue that might never come. I settled back against my snow wall, pulling the thermal blanket tighter. The headlamp clicked off, plunging me into darkness again. The temperature seemed to drop further, my extremities growing numb despite my efforts. As my watch ticked over to midnight, marking the end of my first day entombed, I whispered a promise to myself. I am getting out of here. I am going home. But even as I said it, a darker voice whispered back. No one survives 3 days buried in snow. I would have to prove that voice wrong. Day 2, the descent. I must have dozed despite my best efforts, because I jolted awake to complete darkness and momentary confusion. Where was I? Why couldn't I move? Then reality crashed back. The avalanche, my snowy prison, the failed rescue attempt. My watch read 5:43 a.m. My body felt like one massive bruise, joints stiff and muscles screaming from hours in the same cramped position. The cold had deepened overnight, seeping into my bones until I could no longer distinguish between my body and the ice surrounding it. Most concerning, my injured leg had swollen inside my boot, the pressure making me nauseous. I allowed myself a moment of pure, unfiltered fear. Tears froze on my cheeks before they could fully fall. Then, mechanically, I began my morning routine, if such a thing can exist when buried alive. Small sips of water, now mostly ice that I had to suck on. A quarter of an energy bar, chewed slowly to make it last. Gentle stretches within my confined space to restore circulation. The headlamp revealed an alarming development. My breath had created a layer of ice on the ceiling of my cavity, sparkling menacingly in the light. If it built up enough, it might collapse onto me. I broke it off with the handle of my multi-tool, the pieces shattering around me like broken glass. According to my plan, this was when I should start digging upward. But something felt wrong. The quality of the silence had changed overnight, becoming thicker, more oppressive. And there was something else, a subtle shift in the air. It tasted wetter, somehow. When I pressed my gloved hand against the wall beside me, it yielded more easily than it should have. The temperature had risen outside. The snowpack was changing. Avalanche training came back to me in fragments. Snow undergoes constant metamorphosis. As temperatures fluctuate, the crystalline structure changes. Sometimes it strengthens, depth hoar turning to concrete-like layers. But when temperatures rise significantly, especially after a fresh snowfall, melting, settlement, potential secondary slides. I abandoned my plan to dig upward. If the snowpack was destabilizing, creating a vertical tunnel might trigger a collapse. Instead, I needed to find the most stable direction and work that way. But which way? In the featureless white of my prison, direction was meaningless. My only guide was the avalanche probe. I pushed it in different directions, testing resistance. To what I thought was east, solid after about 3 feet. North, similar. West, the probe sank almost its full length before hitting resistance. South, Moderate resistance, but a different quality. Softer, less compressed. South it was then. I began to dig. Digging in packed snow with limited tools and space is nothing like shoveling your driveway. Each handful removed has to go somewhere else in your already cramped space. Your arms quickly tire from working in awkward positions. Your fingers, even in gloves, grow numb from constant contact with ice. And always, there's the fear that removing the wrong section will bring everything down on your head. I established a system. Scoop snow with my hands, pack it beneath me, creating a slightly downward sloping tunnel. Use the probe occasionally to check my direction. Rest when my arms threatened to give out. The headlamp remained on. My lifeline against the crushing psychological weight of darkness. Hours passed in a monotonous blur of white. My world narrowed to the next handful of snow, the next few inches gained. I lost track of time, startled to discover it was already past noon when I finally checked my watch. My progress: a tunnel roughly 4 feet long and barely wide enough for my shoulders. The exertion had benefits. My body temperature had risen enough that I'd had to unzip my jacket slightly. But it came at a cost. My water was nearly gone, and hunger had become a constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that sapped my strength. Worse, the activity had aggravated my injured leg, which now throbbed with each heartbeat. I paused to rest, leaning against the wall of my tunnel, when I felt it. A subtle vibration, so faint I might have imagined it. Then another, stronger. The snow around me was shifting. My tunnel was collapsing. I had perhaps 3 seconds to react. Instinctively, I lunged forward, driving myself deeper into the tunnel as the section behind me crumbled with a soft whump. Snow filled the space I'd occupied moments before, cutting off my retreat. When the debris settled, I found myself in a new predicament. My original air pocket was gone, replaced by this narrow tunnel that now extended about 6 feet. I could no longer sit up or turn around. I could only move forward or remain where I was. The collapse had also claimed casualties. My backpack, with most of my remaining supplies, was now buried behind me. All I had was what I carried in my pockets: the multi-tool headlamp, my nearly empty water bottle, and 1 energy bar. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced myself to breathe, counting each inhale and exhale until the roaring in my ears subsided. This wasn't a disaster, I told myself. Just a complication. I would adapt. The tunnel continued to feel unstable, small particles of snow drifting down with each movement. I needed to either reinforce it or keep moving. With my supplies lost, reinforcement seemed unlikely. Forward then. I continued digging, now with a desperate energy born of fear. The snow's consistency was changing, becoming granular and wet. Was I approaching the surface, or merely a pocket where meltwater had gathered? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, my hand broke through into nothing. Empty space. I widened the hole cautiously, shining my headlamp through. What I saw made my heart sink. Not the surface, but a void within the snow. Likely an air pocket created when the avalanche had flowed around some obstacle. The space was larger than my original cavity, perhaps 8 feet across and 4 feet high at its tallest point. But it was still buried deep within the slide. I had a choice: remain in my deteriorating tunnel or move into this new space, which offered more room but no clear path to safety. After a moment's hesitation, I wriggled through the opening, wincing as my injured legs scraped against the edges. The room I entered was eerily beautiful. The headlamp illuminated walls of compacted snow that sparkled with embedded ice crystals. The floor was relatively flat, though uneven. The ceiling arched above, supported partly by what appeared to be a fallen tree trunk now snowbound. This space felt more stable than my tunnel, the snow more firmly packed. It also felt marginally warmer, perhaps from being deeper within the snow mass, insulated from surface temperature fluctuations. I did a slow circuit of my new domain, tapping walls gently with the probe to test for weaknesses or potential exit routes. The most promising direction seemed to be downhill, possibly toward the natural drainage of the slope. But conventional wisdom warned against digging downward. Surface rescuers would never find me if I went deeper. As I considered my options, exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't truly rested since before the avalanche, running on adrenaline and fear. My body demanded respite. I cleared a small area against what seemed like the most stable wall, then sat with my back against it, legs extended. The relief of being able to stretch fully was almost painful. I allowed myself to close my eyes just for a moment. When I opened them again, my watch showed 5:18 p.m. I'd slept for almost 2 hours. The headlamp had switched off automatically to conserve battery, leaving me in absolute darkness. As I fumbled to turn it back on, I became aware of sounds, subtle creaks and groans from the snow around me, but also something else. Something rhythmic, a dripping. The beam of light revealed the source, a small trickle of water seeping from the ceiling, collecting in a depression on the floor. Meltwater from above. I watched, transfixed, as another drop fell, creating ripples in the tiny puddle. My first thought, water. My bottle was nearly empty, and dehydration would kill me almost as quickly as cold. I moved toward the puddle, intending to refill my bottle. My second thought stopped me cold. If water was penetrating from above, the snowpack was warming significantly. Warming meant destabilization. Destabilization meant... I didn't complete the thought before it happened. A section of ceiling approximately 2 feet square suddenly dropped, disintegrating into wet chunks that splashed into the puddle. I scrambled backward, narrowly avoiding being hit. More snow followed, then a rush of water. Dirty, but definitely water. When the miniature cave-in stabilized, I found myself staring at a new feature in my snow room. A small but steady stream of meltwater flowing from a hole in the ceiling, creating a growing pool on the floor. The water brought with it earthy smells, soil, vegetation, life beyond the sterile snow. This changed everything. The water was coming from somewhere above, perhaps the surface, or at least closer to it than I currently was. And water followed the path of least resistance, which meant it might lead to a way out. I approached the new opening cautiously. It was too small for me to fit through, but I could see upward into a narrow, irregular chimney in the snow. The headlamp's beam couldn't penetrate its full depth. Could I enlarge it enough to climb up? The snow around the opening seemed soft and unstable, already melting from the water flow. Digging might trigger another collapse, potentially a catastrophic one. But what choice did I have? My resources were dwindling. No one had found me yet. And this was the first real connection to the world above I'd discovered. I used the avalanche probe to carefully test the snow around the opening, gauging its depth and stability. Then, with painful slowness, I began to enlarge the hole, removing small chunks of snow and packing them against the far wall. The work was treacherous. Twice, mini collapses threatened to bury me. Each time, I froze in place until the snow settled, heart hammering against my ribs. After an hour of painstaking labor, I had widened the opening enough to potentially squeeze through, but how far did it go? And was it stable enough to support my weight? I shined the headlamp upward again. The chimney extended perhaps 10 feet, narrowing in places but remaining passable. Beyond that, darkness, impossible to interpret. This was the moment of decision. Stay in my relatively stable snow room, conserving energy and hoping for rescue? Or risk everything on this uncertain path that might lead to the surface or to my death? Sarah's face floated before me, her expression a mixture of hope and worry. What would she tell me to do? Fight, I whispered, answering my own question. She'd tell me to fight. I secured the headlamp firmly on my forehead, tucked the multi-tool and empty water bottle into inner pockets, and began my ascent. Climbing a vertical chimney of snow with an injured leg and exhausted body is not something I would recommend. The walls crumbled under too much pressure, offering treacherous handholds that disintegrated without warning. The water made everything slick, soaking through my gloves until my fingers lost feeling. And always, there was the fear that the entire structure might collapse, burying me for good. I inched upward, bracing my back against one wall and my feet against the other in places where the chimney narrowed enough to allow it. In wider sections, I had to dig crude handholds, testing each one thoroughly before trusting it with my weight. The headlamp illuminated only a few feet ahead, leaving me constantly climbing into the unknown. Water streamed down my face, into my eyes, down my neck. My clothes, already damp from melted snow, became sodden. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, I reached what appeared to be a widening in the chimney. Encouraged, I pushed upward more aggressively and felt the snow give way beneath my foot. I slipped, scrabbling desperately for purchase. For one nauseating moment, I was in free fall. Then my outstretched hand caught something solid, a root or branch embedded in the snow wall. My shoulder wrenched painfully as my full weight jerked against it, but the hold remained firm. Hanging there, legs dangling into darkness, I made a discovery that changed everything. What I had grabbed wasn't merely a root. It was part of a complex network of vegetation, the understory of a forest now buried beneath the avalanche. Plants meant connection to the ground. Connection to the ground meant I wasn't climbing toward the surface, but deeper into the avalanche debris, following the water's path downward. I had been going the wrong direction entirely. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had expended precious energy, risked collapse, all to move farther from potential rescue. For a moment, I simply hung there, too exhausted and disheartened to move. The temptation to let go, to surrender to gravity and whatever lay below, was almost overwhelming. What was the point of continuing the struggle when every decision I made seemed to worsen my situation? Then I felt it. A subtle movement of air against my face. Not the stagnant cold of my snow prison, but a current, fresh air. Where there was airflow, there was a connection to the outside world. Renewed determination surged through me. I pulled myself up using the root network, finding more solid handholds among the tangled vegetation. The chimney widened into what seemed like a small cavern, where the avalanche had flowed around a stand of saplings, creating a void. The air movement was definitely stronger here. I followed it, crawling on hands and knees through a tunnel formed by snow-covered branches. The vegetation had created a natural framework that prevented the snow from completely compacting in this area. After perhaps 15 feet of crawling, I saw it. A faint, bluish glow ahead. Not daylight. It was well past sunset now, but different from the harsh white of my headlamp. Ambient light filtering through snow. I moved faster, ignoring the protests from my injured leg and aching shoulders. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing me to squirm on my belly. The blue glow grew stronger, and the air, The air tasted different, colder but fresher. With a final push, I broke through a thin crust of snow and found myself looking at stars. Not the surface, not exactly. I had emerged onto a slope still covered in avalanche debris, but in a place where the snow was only about 2 feet deep. Above me, the night sky spread vast and clear, stars piercing the darkness with cold fire. I dragged myself fully out of the tunnel, then simply lay there, gulping the fresh air. The temperature had dropped with nightfall, probably around -15 Celsius. But after the damp chill of my snow prison, it felt almost refreshing. When my breathing steadied, I took stock of my surroundings. I appeared to be near the bottom edge of the avalanche field, where the debris had begun to thin out as it lost momentum. Below me, perhaps 100 yards away, I could make out dark shapes that might be trees, the untouched forest beyond the slide's reach. Above and behind me, the main avalanche field stretched upward, a massive, ghostly swath of destruction visible even in the darkness. The scale of it staggered me. I had been buried somewhere in that immensity for over 30 hours. I tried to stand, intending to make my way toward the trees where I might find shelter. But my injured leg buckled immediately. The adrenaline that had carried me through my escape was fading, leaving me weak and shaking. The reality of my situation reasserted itself. I was still lost in the wilderness, injured, without supplies, in freezing temperatures, at night. I had escaped one death trap, only to find myself in another. But unlike the buried snowfield where rescuers would never see me, here I was visible. Here there was hope. I retrieved the headlamp, switching it to its highest setting. Then, conserving its remaining battery, I began signaling. 3 long flashes, 3 short, 3 long. SOS, repeated until my thumb grew numb from pressing the button. Between signal sequences, I fought to stay awake, knowing that sleep in these temperatures would be fatal. I recited poetry again, performed mental arithmetic, anything to keep my brain functioning. I tucked my hands into my armpits for warmth, curled my body to conserve heat. My watch read 11:37 p.m. when the battery in my headlamp finally died, leaving me in darkness broken only by starlight. I continued calling out periodically, though my voice had diminished to a hoarse whisper. As midnight approached, marking the end of my second day in this ordeal, I found myself speaking to Sarah as if she could hear me. "I'm trying," I told the stars. "I'm still trying." The cold deepened. My shivering grew more violent, then, alarmingly, began to subside. A sign of advancing hypothermia. My thoughts became disjointed, fragmentary. Faces from my past appeared in the darkness, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. I'm not sure when I noticed the pinprick of light in the distance. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, or perhaps a particularly bright star. But it moved, bobbing slightly. A headlamp. Someone was coming. I tried to shout, but my voice was gone. I tried to stand, to wave, but my limbs refused to cooperate. All I could do was watch as the light grew larger, separated into 2 lights, then 3. The lead figure reached me first, dropping to their knees beside me. A face appeared, features indistinct behind a headlamp's glare. "We found him." The voice seemed to come from very far away. "He's alive." Hands touched me, checking pulse, pupils. Someone wrapped something warm around me. Voices asked questions I couldn't process. "Sarah," I managed to whisper. "Tell Sarah." But consciousness was slipping away, darkness rising to claim me despite my best efforts to remain awake. The last thing I remember from that night was being lifted onto some kind of stretcher, the stars wheeling overhead as my rescuers began the journey down the mountain. I had survived the avalanche,